graveyard shift at a warehouse distribution center for about 14 months. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was quiet, and quiet was what I needed at that point in my life. The facility was massive, 3 connected buildings that covered maybe 200,000 square feet in total, and at night there were only 4 of us on shift. Me, a forklift operator named Dean, a loader named Terrence, and our shift supervisor, Gail, who spent most of her time in the front office doing paperwork. My job was security. I sat in a small room near the east entrance and watched 16 monitors connected to cameras spread across the property. Parking lots, loading docks, hallways, the main floor. Most nights, nothing happened. I'd watch empty hallways for 8 hours, check doors twice during my shift, and go home when the sun came up. It was boring. I want to be honest about that, because what I'm about to describe didn't happen during some dramatic, stormy night. It happened during the most boring stretch of the most boring job I've ever had, and that's part of why it stuck with me. The monitors were old, not ancient, but probably 15 years behind whatever was current. The image quality was grainy, black and white, with that stuttered frame rate that makes everything look slightly unnatural. You get used to it. After a few weeks, you stop really seeing it. Your eyes learn to filter for motion, and everything else just becomes static. The room itself was small, about 10 by 10, with a desk, the monitor bank, a mini fridge I brought from home, and a chair that leaned slightly to the left, no matter how many times I adjusted it. There was one window, but it faced an interior hallway, so it was never useful for anything other than seeing if the hallway lights were on. I kept the door closed most of the time. There was no lock on it, which I'd mentioned to Gail once, and she'd said she'd look into it, but she never did. I'd been working there for about 9 months when I first noticed something I couldn't explain. It was a Thursday, I remember, because Thursdays were when Terrence brought in those gas station Danishes and left one on the break room table for me, and I'd eaten it around 1 in the morning. I was back in the monitor room, scanning the feeds like I always did, and I noticed that the camera on the south loading dock showed the bay door about a quarter of the way open. That wasn't unusual on its own. Dean sometimes left one cracked for airflow if he'd been running the forklift hard, but Dean had gone home sick that night. I was sure of that because Gail had mentioned it during our overlap at the start of the shift, and Terrence had complained about it because it meant more work for him. So I called Terrence on the radio and asked if he'd opened the south bay door. He said no. I asked if maybe he'd been down there earlier and forgotten. He said he hadn't been to the south building at all that night. I stared at the monitor for a while, trying to decide if it was worth walking all the way over there to close it. The south building was the farthest from my room, a good 7 or 8 minute walk through connecting hallways. I decided I'd check it on my next round. When I looked at the monitor again about 20 minutes later, the door was closed. I didn't think much of it at the time. I assumed Terrence had gone down there and closed it and just hadn't radioed me about it. Or maybe I'd been wrong about it being open in the first place. The image quality on those monitors could be misleading, especially on the south dock camera, which had a slight flicker that maintenance had never fixed. I wrote it in the log as a possible door issue and moved on. About a week later, I was doing my first walkthrough of the night. I usually did one around midnight and another around 4. And when I got to the south building, I noticed that one of the motion sensor lights in the corridor leading to the dock was on. These lights were on a timer. They'd kick on when they detected movement and shut off after about 5 minutes. I stood there for a moment, watching it. It turned off while I was looking at it. That meant whatever had triggered it had done so within the last 5 minutes. I walked the corridor, checked the dock, checked the doors. Everything was locked. Everything was normal. I told myself it was probably a rat or a bird that had gotten in. We'd had birds in the south building before, but when I got back to the monitor room and rewound the footage, we had a basic recording system that kept about 72 hours before overwriting. I checked the south corridor camera for the 10 minutes before I arrived. The motion light never came on in the footage. The camera showed a dark hallway the entire time. I watched it 3 times. The light in the hallway never turned on, but I had seen it on with my own eyes. I'd watched it turn off. I mentioned it to Gail the next evening when our shifts overlapped. She said the cameras sometimes had delays or dropped frames, especially the ones in the south building, which were on an older circuit. She wasn't concerned. I wasn't really concerned either, not then. It was just a small thing that didn't add up, and in a building that old, small things not adding up was practically a daily occurrence. Doors stuck, lights flickered. The HVAC system made sounds that could convince you someone was whispering 2 rooms away if you let your imagination run. I didn't let my imagination run. That wasn't the kind of person I was. The thing that changed, and I've thought about this a lot, trying to figure out exactly when it shifted, was about 3 weeks after the motion light incident. I was sitting in the monitor room, maybe 2:30 in the morning, and I was looking at the feed from camera 9, which covered the main hallway connecting the central building to the south building. It was a long, straight corridor, well lit, nothing in it but concrete floor and cinder block walls. And I saw something move. Not clearly. It was like a shadow shifted at the far end of the hallway, near the edge of the frame. I leaned forward and stared at it. Nothing was there. The hallway was empty. But I had this feeling, and I know how that sounds, that the image on the monitor wasn't quite right. Like something about the proportions was off, or the lighting had changed in a way I couldn't identify. I stared at that monitor for probably 10 straight minutes, and I couldn't figure out what was bothering me. I rewound the footage. I watched the hallway. I didn't see the shadow again, but I noticed something else. At around 2:28, about 2 minutes before I'd seen the shadow, the frame stuttered. Just for a moment. A tiny jump, the kind those old cameras did all the time. But when the image came back, the light in the hallway looked very slightly different. Not brighter or darker exactly, but the shadows on the floor were in slightly different positions, as if the angle of the light had changed, or as if the camera had moved. Barely, maybe a degree or 2. I got up and walked to the central hallway and looked at the camera. It was mounted on a bracket near the ceiling, about 12 feet up. It looked normal. I couldn't tell if it had been moved. I didn't have a ladder, and I wasn't going to drag one over at 3 in the morning to check a camera angle. I went back to the monitor room, and I sat there, and I watched the feeds, and nothing else happened that night, but something had started. Something in the way I watched the monitors had changed. I wasn't scanning for motion anymore. I was looking for things that were almost right, but not quite. Over the next few weeks, I started keeping a small notebook. I wrote down things that seemed off, no matter how minor. A door that was closed on one check and open on the next, with no one claiming to have touched it. a camera feed that showed a slightly different angle than I remembered. Sounds on the walkthrough that I couldn't locate. None of it was dramatic. All of it had a reasonable explanation. That's what made it so hard to talk about, because every individual thing was nothing. A door can drift open if the latch doesn't catch. Cameras on old brackets can shift over time. Warehouses make sounds. I knew all of that, but the notebook kept getting longer. The one entry that still bothers me, the one I keep coming back to, was from a Tuesday night, maybe 6 weeks after I first noticed the loading dock door. I was doing my 4 a.m. round, and when I got back to the monitor room, my chair was in a different position, not dramatically. It was maybe 6 inches further from the desk than where I'd left it, and it was turned slightly to the right. I always pushed my chair in when I left the room because the space was small, and if I didn't push it in, it blocked the path to the door. It was a habit. I was sure I'd pushed it in. But here's the thing. When I sat down and looked at the monitors, I noticed that the angle of the chair, the way it was turned, lined it up more directly with monitor 12. Monitor 12 showed the east parking lot, which was where I parked my car. From the position the chair was in, you'd be looking right at my car. That might have been a coincidence. It probably was. But I sat there, and I looked at my car on the monitor, alone in the parking lot, under a sodium light, and I felt something I hadn't felt in that room before. I felt like I was seeing my car the way someone else had been seeing it. Like I was sitting in the place where someone else had been sitting. I checked the recording of the monitor room camera. There was no monitor room camera. It was the one room in the facility that didn't have one. I'd never thought about that before. I started locking the monitor room door with a rubber doorstop wedged under it from the inside. I know that sounds paranoid, and maybe it was. Gail asked me about it once when she came to drop off a schedule change, and I had to kick the doorstop out to let her in. I told her the door kept drifting open, and it bothered me. She gave me a look like she didn't quite believe me, but didn't care enough to press it. I didn't tell her about the chair. I didn't tell anyone about the chair, or the notebook, or any of it. Because what would I say? Someone moved my chair 6 inches? A light came on in a hallway? I could hear how it would sound. The last thing that happened, the thing that made me eventually request a shift transfer, happened on a Saturday night, about 2 weeks before I left. I was in the monitor room, doorstop in place, watching the feeds. It was around 3:15. Terrence had gone to his car for something, and Gail was in the front office. I was alone in the building, as far as I knew, and I was watching Monitor 9, the central hallway, when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. There was a coffee cup on the floor of the hallway. A paper cup, the kind you'd get from a gas station. It was sitting upright against the wall, about halfway down the corridor. I had walked that hallway 2 hours earlier on my midnight round. It wasn't there. Terrence hadn't been in that part of the building. Nobody had. I stared at it for a long time. It just sat there, small and ordinary, a paper coffee cup on a concrete floor. It could have blown in from somewhere. It could have been there on my earlier round and I just missed it. There were explanations. I watched the recording. At 2:47 a.m., the frame stuttered that same tiny jump I'd noticed before, and when the image came back, the cup was there. It wasn't there, then the frame jumped, and then it was. I went back further. I watched the hallway from midnight to 2:47, frame by frame in some places. I never saw anyone enter the hallway. I never saw anyone place the cup. It just appeared in the gap between frames. I put on my jacket and walked to the central hallway. The cup was there, right where the monitor showed it. I picked it up. It was half full of cold coffee. I stood in that hallway, holding that cup, and I looked up at the camera above me, and I had a thought that I couldn't shake afterward. I thought, if someone knew where the blind spots were, if someone understood the frame rate and the stutter patterns and the recording gaps, they could move through this building and never appear on a single feed. And they wouldn't just have to know the system, they'd have to have watched it. They'd have to have sat somewhere and studied it the way I studied it for a long time. I looked up at the camera, and the red recording light was steady, and I knew that back in the monitor room, I was on the screen, standing in the hallway, holding a coffee cup, and I knew that the monitor room was empty. I doorstop locked it from the outside when I left. Anyone could be watching. The thought came and went, and I told myself it was ridiculous, and I threw the cup away, and I went back to the monitor room, and I finished my shift. I put in for a transfer the following Monday. I told Gail I wanted day shifts for personal reasons. She approved it without asking questions. On my last graveyard shift, I cleaned out the monitor room, my mini fridge, a jacket, the notebook. As I was leaving, I looked at the monitors one last time. All 16 feeds, all quiet, all empty. And then I turned the lights off in the room and closed the door, and as I walked away, I had this thought that I've never been able to get rid of. I was leaving, but the monitors were still on. The cameras were still recording. And if someone had been watching them when I wasn't there, they'd know I was gone now. They'd know the room was empty. I still can't explain any of it. I've tried. I've gone through every rational explanation, and any one of them works for any single incident. But all of them together, over those weeks, I don't know. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I was tired and paranoid and working too many nights alone in a building that was too big and too quiet. That's probably what it was. But sometimes, late at night, I think about that chair, turned toward the monitor, showing my car, and I wonder who was sitting in it. This happened maybe 2 years ago, give or take a few months. I'm not great with dates, and I didn't write any of this down while it was happening, so some of the details might be slightly off. But the broad strokes are accurate. I'm certain of that much. I was living in a mid-sized city at the time, working remotely, which meant I didn't go out much during the day. When I did go out, it was usually in the late afternoon or early evening walks mostly, to clear my head after sitting at a computer for 8 hours. I had a route I liked. It took me through a residential area, past a small park, along a creek path, and back around to my apartment. It was about 40 minutes total, and I did it maybe 4 or 5 times a week. I mention this because routine is important to what happened. I was a person with a predictable pattern, and I didn't think about that at the time. The first thing I noticed was a car, a dark sedan, the kind that could be a Camry or an Accord or any of a dozen other models, the kind of car you wouldn't look at twice. It was parked on the street about a block from my apartment, facing the direction I usually walked. I noticed it because it was parked in a spot where people didn't usually park. That stretch of the street was a bit awkward, too close to a fire hydrant to be legal, technically, though I don't think anyone ever got ticketed for it. The car was just sitting there, no one in it, or at least no one I could see. I walked past it and didn't think about it again. The next evening, it was there again. Same spot, same car, or at least the same color and general shape. I didn't check the plates. I had no reason to. It was a car parked on a street, but I noticed it, and the fact that I noticed it twice made me notice it a third time, 2 days later, and then a fourth. It wasn't there every day, but it was there maybe 3 or 4 times a week, and it was always in that same spot, and I never saw anyone get in or out of it. I want to be careful about how I describe what I was feeling, because I don't want to make it sound more dramatic than it was. I wasn't scared. I wasn't even suspicious. Not really. It was more like a mild curiosity that I couldn't shake. The car was probably nothing someone who lived on that street, or a visitor, or a commuter who parked there and walked to a bus stop. There were explanations, but I started paying attention to it in a way that I couldn't seem to stop. About 2 weeks after I first noticed the car, I altered my route slightly, not consciously at first. I just went a different way one evening, turned left instead of right out of my apartment, walked a different set of streets. It wasn't until I was halfway through the walk that I realized I'd changed my route to avoid passing the car. That bothered me. Not the car, the fact that it had changed my behavior without me deciding to let it. So the next evening, I went back to my normal route, specifically to walk past the car and prove to myself that it was just a car. It wasn't there. The spot was empty. I walked past it and felt foolish and went on my usual route through the park and along the creek. And I was about 20 minutes into my walk on the creek path when I saw it, or I think I saw it. The creek path runs along a road for part of its length, separated by a low fence and a strip of grass. The road is a residential street, not busy, and there was a dark sedan parked on it, maybe 100 yards ahead of me. It was facing toward me. I couldn't tell if it was the same car. I genuinely couldn't. It was the right color, the right general shape, but I was too far away to see the plates, and like I said, it was a common-looking car. I kept walking. As I got closer, maybe 50 yards away, the car pulled out of the spot and drove off, slowly, not in a hurry, just a normal departure, like someone who'd been waiting for a text or finishing a phone call and then decided to leave. I watched it go. I couldn't read the plates. The light was wrong, that late afternoon light that's bright but low, right in your eyes. The car turned at the end of the street and was gone. I stood there on the path for a moment, and I felt something I can only describe as a small, cold clarity, like a puzzle piece clicking into place, except the puzzle was one I didn't want to be assembling. The car had been on my route, not near my apartment this time, but on my route, halfway through my walk, on a street I passed through every time I walked the creek path. It could have been a coincidence. It almost certainly was a coincidence. But it felt like something else. It felt like someone knew where I'd be. I started varying my walks after that. Different times, different routes, different directions. I told myself it was because I wanted variety, but that was a lie. I was testing something. I wanted to see if the car would appear again, and if it did, whether it would appear on the new routes. For about a week, I didn't see it at all. The spot near my apartment was empty every time I looked. No dark sedans anywhere on any of my walks. I started to relax. I started to feel like the whole thing had been a product of too much time alone and too little sleep, and the kind of pattern recognition glitch that happens when your brain doesn't have enough real problems to solve. Then, on a Wednesday, I remember it was a Wednesday because the garbage bins were out. I was walking a route I'd never taken before. I'd deliberately gone in the opposite direction from my apartment, through a neighborhood I didn't usually visit, just to be somewhere unfamiliar. And I was about 3 blocks into it when I saw a dark sedan parked on the street ahead of me. Same color, same shape. It was parked in front of a house, perfectly normal, perfectly ordinary. There was no one in it that I could see. I stopped walking. I stood on the sidewalk and looked at the car, and I tried to make myself feel nothing about it. It was a common car. There were probably thousands of them in the city. The fact that I was seeing dark sedans everywhere said more about me than about whatever was or wasn't happening. I knew that. I believed that. But I also took out my phone and took a picture of the car, including the license plate. I don't know why. It felt like something a reasonable person would do, a way of collecting evidence, or at least creating the appearance of evidence. I still have the photo somewhere. I've never done anything with it. The thing that I keep coming back to, the detail that I can't rationalize away quite as easily as the others, happened the following Saturday. I decided not to walk at all that day. I stayed inside, worked, made dinner, watched something on my laptop. At around 9 p.m., I went to close my living room curtains, and I looked down at the street. My apartment was on the 3rd floor, and the living room window faced the street. The spot where the car usually parked was visible from there, about a block to the left. The car was there, and someone was in it. I could see the interior light was on, just barely, that dim orange glow that comes on when you open a door and doesn't go off until you close it. Someone had just gotten in or just gotten out. I stood at the window and watched. The light went off. The car sat there in the dark. I watched it for maybe 15 minutes, standing back from the window so I wouldn't be visible if someone looked up. And then I told myself to stop, and I closed the curtains and went to bed. In the morning, the car was gone. There was nothing in the spot where it had been. No oil stain, no tire marks, nothing to indicate it had ever been there. I walked down and looked, because by that point, I think I needed to confirm it had been real. The street was just a street. The spot was just a spot. I stood there in the morning light, feeling vaguely foolish, and went back upstairs. I moved about 3 months later. For unrelated reasons, my lease was up, and I found a better place in a different part of the city. I never saw the car at the new apartment. I never saw it again, actually, or if I did, I didn't recognize it as the same one. And that's the thing that still nags at me. Not that the car was there, but that it stopped being there. If it had been a neighbor's car or a regular commuter, it would have kept appearing after I stopped looking for it. But it didn't. It was there when I was paying attention to it, and it was gone when I left, as if its presence had been connected to mine. I know how that sounds. I know it's not evidence of anything. I know that the simplest explanation is that I fixated on a common car and built a pattern out of noise, and that when I moved, the pattern broke because I stopped looking. I know that, but knowing something intellectually and believing it are two different things. And late at night, I sometimes think about that interior light coming on, someone getting in or getting out, a block from my apartment at 9 on a Saturday night when I happened to be looking. And I wonder what would have happened if I'd never looked at all. I grew up in a small town. Not the kind of small town people romanticize, no charming main street, no white picket fences. It was the kind of small town that existed because a highway exit happened to be there and a gas station was built, and then a few other things accumulated around it until there were enough people to justify a post office and a school. About 2,000 people, maybe a little less. Everyone knew everyone, or at least knew of everyone. That's what people always say about small towns, and in this case, it was mostly true. Which is why what happened was so strange. Because in a town that small, you don't expect to see someone you can't identify. I was 16 or 17 at the time. I can't remember exactly. It was during the school year, fall, or early winter, because it was getting dark early, but it wasn't snow cold yet. I was working at the time, afternoons and weekends, at a hardware store on the main road. It was one of those jobs where most of your shift was spent waiting for someone to come in, and when they did, it was almost always someone you recognized. Mr. Hardesty buying wood screws, Linda from the diner getting a replacement light bulb, the same 20 or 30 people rotating through every week. One afternoon a weekday, slow, a man came in that I didn't recognize. That alone wasn't remarkable. People from out of town stopped sometimes, usually because they needed something for their car or their RV on their way through. But this man didn't seem like he was passing through. He wasn't in a hurry, and he didn't have that slightly lost look that out-of-towners had, that look of someone who doesn't quite know the layout of the store. He walked in, nodded at me, and went straight to the back aisle like he'd been there before. I didn't think much of it at the time. He browsed for a while, bought a pack of cable ties and a roll of duct tape. Nothing unusual for a hardware store, paid cash, and left. I didn't get a great look at his face. He was wearing a baseball cap, average height, average build, the kind of person you'd forget immediately, and I did forget him for about 2 weeks. Then I saw him again, not at the store, at the gas station on the other end of town. I was there with my friend Kyle, buying sodas after school, and the man was standing by the pump, filling up a truck I didn't recognize. I only noticed him because he was looking at me, not staring, exactly. It was more like he was looking in my direction, and I happened to meet his eyes. And there was a beat, just a fraction of a second, where it felt like he'd been watching me before I turned my head. He looked away. I looked away. Kyle said something, and we left, and I forgot about it again. The third time, maybe a week later, was at the football game. Our town had a high school team that wasn't very good, but the games were one of the few social events, so most people went. I was in the bleachers with a group of friends, and during halftime, I went to get a hot dog from the concession stand. The line was long, and while I was waiting, I scanned the crowd out of boredom, and I saw the man. He was standing on the far side of the field, near the visitor bleachers, by himself. Not sitting, not watching the game, just standing, and he was facing in my general direction. I want to be very precise about this, because I've gone over it many times in my head, and I'm not sure I'm remembering it right. I don't think he was looking at me, specifically. He was looking toward the concession stand, which was a busy area with maybe 40 or 50 people around it. I could have been imagining the connection. I probably was, but something about seeing him 3 times at the store, the gas station, and now the game made me feel like the connection was real, even though I had no reason to think so. I told Kyle about it that night. I described the man average, baseball cap, drove a truck I didn't know. Kyle didn't know who I was talking about. I described him to my mom casually, like I was just curious. She didn't recognize the description either, but she also wasn't particularly interested. Probably someone's cousin visiting, she said, or someone who moved into one of the rentals on Mill Road. There were a few houses on Mill Road that turned over frequently cheap rentals that people moved in and out of. It was a reasonable explanation. I accepted it, but I started noticing things that I hadn't noticed before, or maybe things that hadn't been happening before, I can't say which. The first was that our dog, Biscuit, started barking at night. Biscuit was old and mostly deaf, and almost never barked. She slept in the kitchen, and sometime around midnight on 2 or 3 nights that week, she barked 3 or 4 sharp barks, then silence. My dad would get up and look out the window and see nothing and go back to bed. It was probably an animal. We had raccoons, possums, deer. Biscuit might have been going senile. There were explanations. The second thing was smaller but harder to explain. I came home from school one day, and my bedroom window was open. Not wide open, cracked, maybe 2 inches. I always kept it closed. My room was on the ground floor, and I didn't like the idea of bugs getting in. My mom said she hadn't opened it. My dad said he hadn't either. My younger sister's room was upstairs, nowhere near mine. It was possible I'd opened it myself that morning and forgotten, but I had no memory of doing so, and it wasn't something I ever did. I closed it and checked the latch. It was fine. It worked normally. Looking back, that might have been the first sign that something was wrong, or it might have been nothing. That's the problem with all of this. I can't separate the things that mattered from the things that didn't, because I don't know which was which. I just know that for a period of maybe 3 or 4 weeks, things in my town felt slightly different than they had before. Not dangerous, not even scary, exactly. Just off, like a picture hanging at a barely perceptible angle. I saw the man 2 more times after the football game. Once at the grocery store, where he was in the checkout line and didn't seem to notice me at all. And once driving past my house, or past the street my house was on. At least, I was sitting on the front steps doing homework, and a truck I didn't recognize drove past slowly. I couldn't see the driver clearly. The sun was reflecting off the windshield. It might not have even been the same truck, but by that point, I was watching for it, and when you watch for something, you find it, whether it's there or not. And then I stopped seeing him. It just ended. No climax, no confrontation, no resolution. 1 week he seemed to be everywhere, and the next week he was gone, and the week after that, I was back to recognizing every face in town. Biscuit stopped barking at night. My window stayed closed. Everything went back to normal, or what passed for normal, and I never found out who the man was. I asked around, casually, over the next few months. Nobody on Mill Road had had a new tenant during that period. Nobody in town seemed to know anyone matching the description. Kyle forgot about it entirely and looked at me blankly. when I brought it up months later. It was as if the man had never been there, except I knew he had been, because I'd sold him cable ties and duct tape, and he'd paid in cash, and I'd put the money in the register. I'm older now, and I've lived in cities and suburbs and other towns, and I've learned that most things that feel sinister are actually just random. People pass through small towns all the time. They stop at hardware stores and gas stations and even football games. They drive trucks and wear baseball caps and look in the direction of concession stands. None of that means anything. I believe that, but I also remember the way Biscuit barked those nights, not her normal bark, but a low, serious sound, the sound she made when something was in the yard and she was telling it to leave. And I remember my window cracked open 2 inches when I was sure I'd left it closed. And I remember the man looking at me across the gas station, that fraction of a second where our eyes met, and the feeling I had that he'd been watching before I turned. I still can't explain it. I don't try to anymore. But sometimes I think about the fact that in a town where everyone knew everyone, a stranger appeared for a few weeks, and no one else seemed to notice him at all. And I wonder if the reason no one noticed him was that he didn't want to be noticed. And if that's true, then the question that keeps me up sometimes is, why did he let me see him? Was it an accident? Or was the seeing part of it, was I meant to know he was there, meant to feel that prickle at the back of my neck, meant to lie awake listening for Biscuit to bark? I don't know. I'll never know. And there are nights when not knowing feels worse than any answer would.